So, as I mentioned, I'm Corey. I teach social studies over at Gilford High School, and I work here part-time during the school year, and then a little bit more part-time in the summer. I'm also a technology specialist at school, so I help other teachers integrate technology in their classrooms, and as such, I'm a certified Google trainer. So I speak at conferences and things in the state in New England about what's new with Google. I'm also a certified library media specialist, and that's the interest I have in libraries. And so actually Maria, who is one of the children's librarians, had asked me, probably in February, do you think this would be a good program, a fake news thing? And I said, well, yeah, I think so. And so that's how what started this is. And so what I did is I started to put together, do some research on what is fake news and why suddenly it becomes an issue now, and what's being done about it, and why it seems to work. Because if it didn't work, I don't think we would have too much of a problem in terms of elections or shopping, buying things. But it does seem to work. And so I started to investigate the psychology of fake news, and that led me to more research, and then before I know it, this thing was like 2 hours long, and I was like, okay, I gotta ease this back. So tonight, we're gonna go over what is fake news, what are the types of fake news, why is fake news suddenly an issue? I took copious notes. How Americans get their news, how fake news spreads, what a hacker is and what a bot is, the psychology of fake news, what you can do to not be a victim of fake news, and then what is being done with large search engines, namely Google, because that's where my expertise is. All right, so fake news. All right, so there's always been fake news, right? So this is the bat child found in a cave, and there's always been, and this kind of fake news basically was just to sell these pulp magazines, right? And so there's still this kind of thing, like when you're checking out at the supermarket, you can still see these kind of magazines, and some are more grounded in reality than others. The Weekly World News is my favorite. But that changes, but that brings us to like what's new about fake news versus what is like what old-fashioned fake news. And you'll see, like, basically, the pulp is just basically how can we sell these newspapers and make money. Whereas the new ones suddenly have an agenda beyond just making money, right? So, I mean, does the Weekly World News have an agenda? I don't know. I don't know if they have a political slant or not, but I do know that that's the bat child. All right, so modern, to make money and to get clicks. So that brings us to, what does that mean? So when you go to Google and you type in something, and that starts the search engine. So if I typed in Bat Boy, and then I click on the website. When I go to that website, there are ads that are run on the side of that website, okay? If I click on one of those, Google gets paid. If I look at enough of them, Google gets paid. And if my site begins to generate lots of traffic, I get paid. Right? So Google makes money every time you're clicking out searching. That's the Google AdSense program you may have seen down at the bottom of the website, supported by Google AdSense. And then the more traffic a website gets, they start to make money in that the advertisement becomes free, and then their ads show up on other pages. Right? So if I can get people to click on my website, I can drive the cost of my advertising down, and then my revenue up. As we will talk about, to push an agenda, and that could be to sell something, or to disseminate information that may or may not be true, to sway someone's opinion about something, climate change or vaccinations, political parties, whatever. And then there's obviously political reasons, which we'll get to. There's also criminal reasons and theft. And so the idea of, if I can get you to come to this website that's not a real website, I then can rob you of your identity, get your password, and use that password in places. And then there's also satire. So you can see the one thing that they have in common is the idea of money and satire. All right. So what's what when it comes to fake news? All right. So the first one is the big category, which we'll call fake news. And that's going to incorporate all these other categories that we'll talk about. So when you hear fake news on the news, the real news, let's hope it's real news, or when a politician refers to fake news, immediately you should start to think, okay, what are they referring to? Because it's a very broad category. And what I perceive as fake, you may perceive as satire, and what you perceive as satire, I may perceive as fact. And so it's important to note that that's the big category. Okay, so there's misleading news. So in this case, what some sites do, and we'll get to this, is they will take an article that's 4 or 5 years old and bring it back. So it's real news, so it's a headline, right? But it's 4 or 5 years old, appearing now as if it's brand new news. So if you look at that, you go, whoa, that headline's amazing. Really? That's true? Like, amazing. And then when you look and you start reading, you go, oh, wait a minute, I remember this story. But the headline is so good that it generates clicks, right? So that's misleading news. Partisan news. And so we'll get to the politics of this, but there's problems in terms of like the human mind and understanding political news. We struggle to separate news from partisan news. And so partisan news is like Fox News or like MSNBC, right? So they're news from a particular slant. And for the most part, both Fox News and MSNBC, as two examples, have very similar news as long as you're only watching the news portion of their shows. It's when they suddenly go from news to pundit or political spokesperson that suddenly the slant there really changes depending on who's delivering the news. All right, next. Clickbait. Okay, now clickbait is a headline that is just so good you have to find out what it is. All right, like you're like, that sounds amazing, right? Miracle cure, lose 5 pounds in 1 minute, right? Like, woo, or am I hacking off an arm? All right, so, and basically the idea of clickbait has nothing to do with what's behind it. They just want to drive people looking at their website, right? They don't really care at all why you're going there. They're just trying to get you to go. And if you have Facebook or you've seen Facebook, if you ever see in your little stream there one that says a celebrity, and then something that says, you won't believe, like a celebrity top 10, and then it says something like, you won't believe what number 7 is. And they want you to click through 7 different things to get to what that number, and when you finally get there, you realize that's it, that's dumb, right? But every time you're clicking, oh, yeah, that's the way it works, all right? Okay, so satire we talked about, and then this is the big breakdown. What's a pundit and what's a reporter? And so, but back in the old days when we had NBC, ABC, CBS, and, well, those were the big 3, I guess PBS, and then later Fox. Basically, anytime it was 6:30 and the news was on, that was a reporter delivering the news, right? Here's what happened over the course of this day. Here's follow-up on stories from before. When we got into this 24-hour news cycle with stations dedicated to news all the time, there's simply not enough news to fill 24 hours. And so we start to slide from reporters to pundits. And so if you ever watch like This Week, like or Meet the Press, right? So that brings in pundits. And so what pundits do is they speak about the news from an angle. So you can have pundits that are liberal pundits, libertarian pundits, natural law party, Republican pundits, but they're all pundits. But the problem for the human brain, as we'll see, is that when a pundit talks, we can't tell the difference between a pundit and a reporter unless we're really, really paying attention. We have to stop and say, well, okay, wait a minute, what's happening here? And we have a tendency to not want to do that. That requires thinking that we do not want to do. Okay. Has anyone any questions regarding any of this? All right, good. Next. So why is this suddenly an issue? Because certainly these things are nothing new for the most part, but why is it suddenly an issue? And that all has to do with social networking. And so whether you're looking at Twitter or Facebook, which are the 2 big ones, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Google+, Reddit, dig, any places that aggregate information and share it out amongst people, it becomes very complicated in figuring out what's fact and what's not. All of it is often presented as fact. All of it is often presented as news of events that have happened. It's often not, but it's presented that way. Okay, so let's talk about how Americans get their news. And I'm going to use an analogy here. And so we'll start with a common cold. So this is how this, no, first let me give you some stats. All right, stat number 1. So 40% of us exclusively get our news from online sources. And that's fine, like that's okay. There's nothing wrong with an online news source. But as we move through this, we'll see there's a problem from here. 20% of us only from print, right? So there's very few of us left. That's why newspapers have all moved online, right? So there's very few of us that continue to read a newspaper. 60% from television. That includes the weekly, the nightly news, right, as well as the 24-hour news cycle on news stations. And then this is where it gets kind of complicated. 80% of us return to the same source over and over and over for our news. So if we're getting our news from an online source, and that online source is producing news that's not 100% accurate, or it's partisan news, or it's misleading news, we keep going back to that same news source over and over and over again. In many ways, humans are like camels, right? Like we found a watering hole and we keep going to it. And we don't have a tendency to like change once we found the way we like things delivered. And so when things like don't go that way, we say, well, I wonder what this site is saying about that. Or I wonder what this channel is saying about that. Or for a few of us, I wonder what this newspaper is saying about that. 80% click on news stories, headlines they see in social media. Right, so if you're looking at Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and you're seeing headlines there, 80% of people click on those. Now that's not to say that 80% read them, because there's really no way for us to know, to measure like that, because I mean, even if I stayed on the site for a long time, it may just be that I clicked on, put my phone down, so we can't really measure if they're reading them, but they are at least seeing the headline and following it someplace. And then 6 in 10 report that family and friends are important ways to get their news. And this is the reason fake news is now an issue. All right? We spread fake news the way we spread common colds. Right? So, number 1. How does this work? All right, so let's say that I am not a very nice person. Let's say. All right, so let's pretend I'm not a nice person. So what I do is I make a nefarious headline, and I put a bunch of facts in there that are not true. They're, from my angle, I'm trying to generate as much interest in that as I possibly can, and so I start the virus, right? I begin the common cold. All right, so then I have a whole bunch of my friends come over for tea, all right? So we all meet up on Facebook, and in my stream now, there is this incredibly exciting sounding headline that is a little bit slanted, or completely wrong, or totally lies, or totally made up. And you then see that and go, ooh, I like that, and then you share it, and now people who are friends with you see it, and then somebody else says, oh, I like that, and then they see it, and all of a sudden my nefarious little headline with this sort of a fake news behind it has spread all over the place until finally it may end up all the way back around, right? So like I cure myself of this cold, and if I wait long enough, and I'm connected enough with my social network, that headline comes back around and I see it again. Ooh, look, there it is again, right? So it goes like this. A news story that has a juicy sounding headline is created by a fake news outlet. And we'll talk about what those are. 72% of us view news stories on our phone. All right, so when that happens, like if my phone buzzes and I take it out and look at the headline, headline, all right? Most of the time I can't, whatever I'm doing, I can't just continue doing this, so I may take 2 clicks and look at the headline, and then I'll come back to that. So I'm not getting the whole story. I'm not immediately alerted, wait a minute, that's not real, right? So this would be the equivalent of going to the Tea Party and not realizing that you've sadly contracted the virus. All right. And then go back to that stat I told you before, 6 in 10 report family and friends are important news sources. So if multiple family and friends of mine are sharing the same news, whether it's true or not becomes irrelevant. What matters is I'm seeing it multiple times on my phone, and I can't get away from it. It's right here all the time. I can't get away. The fake news headline appears in social media, and the fake news story is shared with family and friends who click on it, and then on and on and on and on and on and on it goes. Now what's interesting is that one of the articles I read by this author here, Kathleen Paul Jamieson, she refers to fake news as viral deception, and she realizes that it's actually VD that she's like, that's her thing. And I read that and said, well, okay, so that's interesting. I was thinking common cold, but we want to go with VD? Hey, that's exciting. And what she said is that what we're really concerned about is the deception behind the fake news, and the deception of a certain sort that goes viral. How does something spread? Because some colds don't, right? I could have a tea party at my house, and you guys could all come, and we could have a great time, and you leave and you don't have a cold, right? But yet sometimes you do. Like, so what is it that does it? It's not all fake news. Remember Bat Boy, right? So Bat Boy certainly is not going to be like spreading around. You might think that's funny, but it's certainly not the same as wondering, is this real? And so she refers to it as viral deception, and I think that's a better way to think of it than fake news, is that you're being deliberately deceived. When we read these articles, whether it's misleading news, clickbait, partisan news, whatever, it is a deliberate thing. Like they are, whoever created this information is doing it to deliberately cause some sort of an outcome. Whereas I think old-fashioned news probably didn't, right? It was more of a, here's the news, we're going to report what happened as to the best of our ability, and we're going to check multiple sources to make sure. And now we don't even really need that. You can just say, well, yeah, this sounds exciting. Let's pull 2 or 3 quotes that sort of string together and sound like a story and post it. And if enough people share it, we all get the virus. Let's hope it's the cold and not a venereal disease. All right. Okay, so what about hackers and bots? So this is bad terminology too. When you think of a hacker, I don't know about you, but when I think of one, I think of a little person, right, who is actually like getting into someone's bank account and drawing money out, like they've hacked in, right? That's not what this is, right? So when it comes to fake news and the proliferation of information, it's not so much about the idea of it, of someone hacking. So I'm sure you've heard that there is some idea that there is Russian involvement in our election, right? Now, the level of what that Russian involvement is still a question mark. And certainly, depending on where you get your news, it's either that like our president is like a member of the Communist Party, or there was some involvement. It completely depends on where you're getting your news from, right? And so what that means is that doesn't appear to be any evidence of any hackers like going into state polling booths and changing votes, right? So in my mind, I think hacker, I think that's what they're doing. Like, okay, so we're going to cast all these votes this way, someone gets in and changes them the other way. No, the outcome of the election is, I think, valid. But the problem is that when people went to the polls, they had been inundated with hacked news. Which brings us then to this concept of a bot. And this is short for like robot, but you think like, you know. So what this is just a little computer program that basically spreads the virus, right? So like what these do is a computer programmer will make a little program that will say, okay, I want you to make Twitter accounts as fast as you possibly can and post your first post be this headline that leads to this story over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that's what a bot does. It basically just tries to generate the virus. It tries to cultivate the bad news, the juicy headline, to see what will stick. So if I'm reading my social network, right, And I know that 60% of us think my friends are an important source of news, and I have been inundated by this bot that has now like just basically blasted me with a headline that I've seen over and over and over and over again, and I click share. Now all of a sudden it's taken on a life. This thing that was once just a little computer program has now created an artificial story or a virus that has been spread among all the people who follow that little breadcrumb trail that we already saw. And that is the real danger, is that a lot of these things are not, they're not made by people. They're made by computers that can make them so fast. Like, if we didn't have these little computer programs that could do this, if someone had to sit there and type in and try to come up with unique Twitter names and passwords, they couldn't generate, right? I mean, I read in some of my research, 60% of all internet traffic is driven by bots. Now, that's not to say that all bots are evil, right? Because there are bots that aggregate news, there are bots that bring you commercials that you might like, right? If I search for a Ford, you'll notice suddenly Ford, you know. So in the winter, what I do is search for vacations, so I get to see exotic places in my youth. So you can use it against it, but 60% of it. So that's not to say that 60% of all the news is fake, but certainly if there's that much traffic that is not made by people, but rather one person who generates these little programs that spread and spread and spread and spread and spread, that's how news, fake news, gets carried along. All right, so they're not hackers. A better word would be information manipulators. So think about like the old-fashioned chain mail, you know, like chain letter, not chain mail armor, but chain letter. You know, like if you don't send this, oh, the world's right, your house is going to burn down. There's like, yeah, okay. So, yeah, and of course you think, well, that's dumb, and throw it away. But not all of us, because we all got one, right? So there are people, oh, wait a minute, I do not want my house to burn down. That is worth the stamp. So I stick this thing on there and I go. Now, but that's one person writing a letter. These are computer programs that can make 100 million letters over and over and over and inundate us with them until we become like, well, if I keep hearing this, maybe it's true. It doesn't sound true, but I've heard it so many times. Maybe it's true. Okay? Boom. All right, now, the psychology of this. So, what is it about these that works, right? So, like, what goes on in the head of a person that allows this to work? Well, the good news is that we all have the capacity to not allow it to work. The bad news is that none of us want to use that capacity, right? There's three psychological concepts that I think fit really well into fake news, right? The first one is confirmation bias. The second one is overconfidence. And then the third one is what's called the belief perseverance phenomenon. And there is nobody who does not succumb to these. Like the human brain, this is what we do. Unless we're aware of it and we can say, wait a minute, I'm doing it again. So Einstein did this, and sadly I do it. All right? We all do it. It's just the way the human brain works. All right, so what are these things? All right, so let's talk confirmation bias. So in this case, what we do is, like, your day-to-day existence is made up of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of little bits of information coming at you. Information all the time, right? I want to drink. And hey, Mommy, what time do I have to go to bed? Right? Thinking of what happens in my house right around now. You know, like what time do I have to be to work? What should I have for breakfast? Like we're constantly inundated by it, right? And so your brain can't handle it. Like nobody's brain can handle all that input. So to make life easier, we sort of just go, well, you know what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a plan, and that'll make life easier because we'll always apply that plan to whatever it is that we're doing, right? It's like learning how to, in your car, how to get to one place and then having a detour without a well laid out like signage. You really know that one thing, but like you can't apply it if suddenly there's a detour. So what we do is that we seek out information that confirms our already held belief, because that's easier. That's much easier. So like if we see information that does not match with our already held belief, we have a tendency to not allow it in. It's like, wait a minute, I already have a plan for that, and I don't want to learn this new one. And that's not that we're bad. It's not that the human brain is bad, that we're evil. It's just that we're inundated with too much material over the course of our lives. And these haven't helped, right? We're inundated now with too much material. And so what we do is we say, once I think I know something, I'm going to hold on to that. And then we also favor information that supports our idea, and we can remember information that supports our idea. So even if we're presented material that doesn't support our idea, and we come to grips with that, even if we say, wow, I must have been wrong, and we get over the confirmation bias, if enough time passes, and you ask me again, how do you feel about that? I don't go with my new idea. I fall back on what I can recall, which is my old idea. You ever learned the lyrics to a song incorrectly, and then been told that's not how that song goes? But it doesn't matter. You sing it that way no matter what. It drives my daughter crazy. In fact, I often know the real words and still do it just to bother her. Where's my clicker? All right, here it is. All right, so that's confirmation bias. Okay, overconfidence. Again, not for any fault of our own, but to survive, we really think that our own abilities are above average. Okay? So, and this is true for like everything. If you ask people, okay, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how attractive are you? Most people give themselves between a 6 and an 8, which means every one of us is above average. Not possible. Like, that's not how it works, right? If you ask people, what social class are you? Almost everybody says middle, right? People who have no money and people who have hundreds of millions of dollars say middle. Because again, we don't like the idea of sticking out. If you ask people, how good of a driver are you? They generally say between 6 and an 8. That's impossible. We can't all be better than the average driver. But that's this idea of overconfidence. Like, look, you are the all-knowing force in the universe inside your brain, right? This story here is your story. You are the star of this movie. I'm just part of it. The person sitting next to you is just part of it, but you're the star. And as the star of a movie, you would not be a below-average driver. You would not be below-average intelligence. Because this is, you are the all-center of the universe. You matter than everybody else. And even if you say, well, you know, I often am very giving. Yeah, that's true, right? But you're giving, and then if I ask you, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how giving are you? You're above average in how much you give. And everybody perceives themselves that way. We have to. Because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to function in this crazy world with all this material. All right. Next. The belief perseverance phenomenon. Now, I believe Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback that ever lived. But if you believe that Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback that ever lived, you'd be wrong. But you could believe that, all right? So it doesn't matter. If Tom Brady could win 500 Super Bowls, if I believe that Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback that ever lived, there's nothing he can do, because that's what I believe. My belief perseveres forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So it doesn't matter how much material I'm shown. Once I have a belief, I hold it sacred. And studies have shown that, like, the smallest things we hold sacred. If we decide something, it could be ridiculous. It could go against our own interests. If we decide, you know, I like that ice cream better than that one, and then after a while we think, well, maybe I made a mistake, I like that one, we will never admit it, even to ourselves, because that is my belief. I hold it sacred. And again, we do that to survive in this crazy, busy world of ours. So if we think about these three things in terms of fake news, if I only get my news, as most Americans do, from the same source over and over again, and I begin to hear the same sort of bias slant from my news, I begin to hold that news and say, well, that must be fact, that must be true. And then if I hear an opposing viewpoint, I disregard it. And even if I let it in, later when I remember, I don't remember what the opposing viewpoint said. 2, overconfidence. And I can't be wrong because I'm above average intelligence, right? And only a stupid person is often wrong, so I can't be wrong. So even this opinion of mine, if you question it, I think it's right because I'm smarter than you, right? And then lastly, belief perseverance. I believe this to be true, and I hold this belief sacred. And when you try to question that belief, I disregard you because of confirmation bias, right? So these three things form kind of a psychological wall where we put ourselves inside this little box and say, all right, I'm going to take news information from this, and I'm not going to take it from any place else. And if anybody questions me about why I only get my news from this source, I will listen, I will nod, and then continue to get my news from this source. We box ourselves in. And we do that not because we're bad, not because we're evil, but because we're humans, and as humans, it's just so much material. We can't do it any other way.
So how do we originally pick fake news to believe rather than true news to believe?
Some of it has to do with how often we see it. Yeah, if we see a headline enough, that becomes our reality. Even if the headline, even if it's not real. Now, what leads one person to watch MSNBC, or what leads one person to watch Fox News, or what leads one person to be a Republican, or leads one person to be a Democrat, or leads one person to be a doctor, or leads one person to be a teacher, whatever. I mean, there's genetics, there's your upbringing, there's the culture, right? So that's a whole other lecture we can talk about, a completely different thing, about how we get there. But once we get there, we all do this. Now look, I know what these things are, right? I teach this, I teach psychology in school, I teach this every year. I know what these things are, and I still do them. I do them all the time, right? And then I do them so often.
You don't engage your brain when you get a question?
So we do for a while, and then we'll have this discussion, and later I'll go back to my belief that is held on forever. That's partly what's good about being a teacher, is it forces you to engage your brain. A lot of times they raise their hand and ask if they can go to the bathroom, but at least they raise their hand. All right, so, all right, now, how common are these? All right, so this guy, Daniel Kahneman, wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow a few years ago, won the Nobel Prize. And he's kind of an odd person. I actually read a whole bunch about him because I really, this book is kind of, it's moving, right? It kind of moves you. And so, but basically what he found after research and conducting experiments is that the brain basically has two types of processing. We have system 1 processing and system 2 processing, right? So when we're faced with material, we have system 1, system 2, that's the way it works. And system 1 is like fast, simple, or old rule thinking. We fall back on what we used to do. I go to a restaurant, I've had a really busy day, I've made 10,000 decisions, I order what I always order. Why? Maybe not because I want it, but because the idea of making another decision is overwhelming and I can't do it. So I point at the menu and say that, right? Or I order a drink first, which relaxes me, and then I can order, right? So, and then there's system 2 thinking, which is slow, methodical, and effortful. And so he refers to these as like the two sides of the brain. Not that we have two brains, but like that every bit of information has access to 1 and 2. Because of the speed of which the material comes into our world, we often fall back on system 1 thinking, right? System 2 thinking requires effort. Your brain is a massive energy hog, right? It lives on sugar, and it requires a lot of calories to function. So if there's a way for it to function simply, meaning fewer calories, less energy, that's the way it's going to go, right? The human body is the pinnacle of efficiency. If I don't exercise a lot, I lose all my fitness. If I don't think a lot, I begin the process of this slow loss of my thinking, because it's use it or lose it. It's that way for survival. Back when we were Erg and Zerg living in caves or whatever, if one of us was out doing exercise and contemplating the future and thinking constantly, he required more calories than me. And when the food dries up, he dies and I don't. So there is a survival mechanism to this fast, easy problem solving, right? There's also a survival mechanism, though, to planning and being slow and methodical in what we're thinking about and taking in vast amounts of information. And that is the combination of what we are. We are quick, fast, simple, and slow, methodical, and effortful. But if you let the brain decide on its own, it will always go to system 1. You have to be actively engaged to tell it, no, don't do that. Okay. All right. So the brain takes in bits of information and forms it into a narrative. How it filters that information, what you choose to pay attention to let in, we can debate all night whether or not you're choosing that or whether there is some mechanism of consciousness that it's choosing it for you. I would argue that there is not a lot of control, but rather an illusion of control that's happening with you choosing what bits of information you let in. I mean, look, if the belief perseverance phenomenon, confirmation bias, and overconfidence are real, and they have been tested and shown over and over to be real, we're not doing that, right? Something is doing that for us, and whether that is us choosing to do that or not, that's another discussion about consciousness, which Mark can attest to that. All right, so this narrative of information is what we put on our screen. Like right now, I'm part of your narrative, right? You may be thinking this guy's talking a lot, you probably are. When is this going to be over? I really like this. Wish there was a way I could leave in money. All right, so whatever. So the narrative of the information is what's on screen. And we can call that on screen. If you want to refer to it as consciousness, you can. But again, that is a different discussion for a different day. But that's what's on our screen. So when a new bit of information enters the brain, Kahneman shown that there is an emotional response to it before it becomes part of our on-screen narrative. So that the hindbrain, the reptilian part of our brain, responds and says, how do I feel about this? And then the frontal part of our brain, the intelligent you, the all-seeing center of the universe, then says, here's a bit of information, and this is how I feel about it. See how weird that is? Like, we have an emotional experience first, and then we decide, how do I feel about that? Whereas if I asked you, do you think you experience things and then decide how you feel about them, that's probably what you think happens, but in research, it appears that's not what happens. Okay, so if something doesn't match how we emotionally feel about a subject, we often ignore it. If I feel like this is a person I can trust, then whatever comes out of their mouth, even if I think to myself, wait a minute, that doesn't sound real, I often say, well, but no, this is a person I can trust, because the information is second to is how do I feel about the source of this information? What's my emotional response to this information? Not what is the information. So if we think about that in terms of fake news, if I see information in my media stream that comes from family and friends, and 60% of us report that family and friends are important places to get news from, and I have an emotional response to it that agrees with how I feel about the person, it doesn't matter what the headline is, how I feel about it, then it enters into my narrative, it gets onto my screen where I begin to think about it. If it doesn't match that, if I have a negative response, if I think this is something I don't agree with, or this person lies often, or is this someone I don't particularly like, it often doesn't even make it onto my screen. Now, whether or not you chose to do that or it happened because of the functioning of the brain is sort of irrelevant, but it's been proven that that is what happens inside your brain. So think about this in terms of the proliferation of fake news. If I see a headline that I might wonder, like, oh, boy, that doesn't seem to fit my narrative, but I trust this source, I have an emotional feeling towards this source that I feel like I like them, they're often truthful, then that bit's information gets in and I accept it. If on the other hand, a piece of news, even if it's a real headline, comes in and I say, you know, this is a person I generally don't like, this is a person, a news organization that I've never heard of, that I'm wondering how this got, it doesn't match with what I already know, we often don't even let it in, meaning we can't compare it to what we already know, we can't think about it, because it doesn't get past the emotional part. Okay, number 2. So system 2 thinking. This is your main weapon against the dreaded fake news, right? So system 2 thinking, sometimes these kind of old rules here are called heuristics, right? Like the availability heuristic or the one you can remember. But they're sort of like They're guidelines of which we float through the world with. And they help to allow us to survive. All right, so this kind of thinking is what's called like algorithms. Step 1, step 2, step 3, if, then, pro, con list, right? Compare, contrast, let's think about, this is the stuff I try to get my students to do, and this is what they desperately want to do, right? So here's where they live, and this is where I'm trying to move them, all right? This is analysis of the narrative, or analysis of what's getting onto your screen. Why is this on my screen? Why am I seeing this? Here you begin to integrate and think about the bits of information in a much larger sense. How do they compare with what I already know? How does this new information compare to what I already know? Not, how does this information compare to how I feel? So, if I look and I hate Hillary Clinton, and I see something about Hillary Clinton, I have an emotional response, and then I read the headline, and if the emotional response is disgust, hatred, confusion, then the headline means almost nothing. But if I can step back and use my high road of processing, right? If I can use system 2, I can say, okay, here's a person I generally don't agree with. Here's a bit of information. How does this fit into what I know in a larger sense? That requires a lot of cognitive effort. And like we talked about, the pinnacle of efficiency is the human body, right? The brain is no different. So that level of contemplative thinking, we often don't like to do. Or we like to do it, but we like to do it with information that matches what we already believe. Yes, sir?
I have a question. Computer games.
Okay?
Don't they require cognitive effort?
Oh, yes.
Why are they so attractive then? Why don't we want
Yeah.
why don't we want games with an answer that's very easy?
We generally play a video game for a very different reason than we seek out news or receive news, even if we're not seeking it out.
I've never played a video game, so I don't
So,
know anyway.
But if you're seeking, like, let's compare it doesn't have to be a video game, any game, whatever you do for pleasure, right? If part of your receiving pleasure, sure.
No, that takes thinking.
Yeah, a lot, right? But it's repetitive thinking within a world that you've already established the guidelines for. If suddenly they change the rules of that, it would be difficult for you. You might like it. You might think, I'm bored with that old one, now it's time for me to get bored, and you may receive some, little pleasure from that, and that might change, and you might think I like it. But let's say that you derive pleasure from observing news, right? And people do. News is entertainment. It can be entertainment. You wonder about the world. I would argue that wondering about the world is different than seeking out news from a slant. Like, if I like this guy's opinion about things, that's not the same as wondering about the world. I'm wondering about his opinion of these things. But if I'm receiving some sort of gratification from that, I think even that falls within this high-low system 1-2. It gets back to why we all go back to the same news, or why you would go back to Sudoku, or why I like crossword puzzles, or why children like video games. Video games are like hyper pleasure, right? Like, if I complete this task, I get a little experience of reward that makes me want to complete another task. But even then, it's within a sandbox or a walled garden within that. So I would think that the idea of entertainment maybe, it certainly fits in the discussion here, but I'm not sure it's the same
The
process.
answer is you get feedback.
So, feedback.
And you don't get feedback from reading the news and just contemplating it.
Yeah, unless you're a deep thinker, and that's what we're trying to get to. Like, some people really do, right? I think about my grandfather. He did everything slowly. Christmas would drive you crazy. Take him 2 hours to open one gift. But that was the way he was with everything. Everything was this contemplative, like every single thing had all the, and then I think about the way my daughter is. Chicken nuggets, boom, let's do this, right now. So, that's not to say that she won't grow up to be like him. I hope she's a little quicker than him. But that's a very good question.
Corey, aren't these almost like, you get two types of people, like we're comparing right now. It's almost like personality traits. And if you're the fast type that you want everything quick, fast, it's hard to slow down and do that, really hard.
Even if you contemplate and you only get news from one source, even the contemplation is still within that same, we're still drinking out of that same watering hole, you know? So even if we're contemplating and wondering about something, we still get it from the same place. We're wondering about it from one angle. And I think that's where the power here is in terms of combating this.
But then I often watch both sides.
Good. Yeah.
A lot of times.
Yeah.
Especially like election night, I flip all over the television. But then you get so that you don't know anything.
Yeah. The hyper reality of it's almost right. What's happening? Where are we?
You know, who's telling the
What
truth?
state was? Yeah.
And
Is she ahead? Is he
who can
ahead? Yeah. Who
you
do I
know,
trust? Yeah.
Maybe they're right, but maybe they're right. And then I sit there and think, I'm not watching the news anymore. I'm just not going to listen because I can't figure it out.
And that's where the pundit reporter becomes really confusing, right? So here's this person talking. Should I believe them? Well, the low road rather, system one says, believe him. It's a guy on TV talking. Believe it. Well, wait a minute. I just saw another one that said something different. Should I believe that? And then the brain often says, like you said, wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm very confused.
Two different incoming streams of information.
Right.
I think I'll go get some ice cream. It's easier. Yeah. All right, so system two thinking, or high road processing, roots out this emotion and allows us to think about things more deeply. And this kind of thinking is the kind of thinking where you think about something, you come away from it, it kind of stays in with you, and you come back to it, you think about it again. There's no easy out, right? Whereas system one always has an easy out. Like that, don't like that, let's do this, don't want to do that. All right. And that, as you asked about video games, is this concept of hyper reality. And this guy has written all kinds of stuff about fake news.
You know, if you think, you never know what's right. Never.
You really don't.
I mean, if you're a scientist, for example, everything is what it is until we learn something new, and then we have to change our picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't think, you can always know the answer. Because that's the answer.
And you're the center of the universe, and you're quite confident in your own abilities, so of course that's the answer. Yeah. I know, yeah. All right, so this is, this guy has written about fake news, and what he says is that the news itself doesn't matter. He calls it the mediated version of the news, right? And like a mediator, basically what this means is that the way the news is presented matters more than the news itself. So from whom we get the news matters more what the news is, right? How it looks matters more than what it actually is. And that can kill us, right? That's where careful processing, where we have to say, wait a minute, is this what is agreed upon? Because again, we can't really know. Or is this a pundit trying to steer me in one direction, or sell me something, or get me to vote in a certain way, or agree with a certain point of view? And that kind of thinking we don't like. We don't like it. We say, wait a minute, I've had a long day, right? I had to make 50,000 decisions today, and now you're telling me I have to decide this?
I saw the end of Euro, with the Euro song business the other night, and it was all show. Somebody sings, but it's all show around.
All right. So what can you do? All right. All right. So let's go over the basic stuff, because this is stuff you can start doing right now. It requires like no effort. All right. We're going to use our brain for good, not for evil. All right. You're going to look for weird web addresses and domains, right? So if something looks weird or vaguely like a news source, but not, right? So this is abcnews.com.es. So if you go, hey, ABC News, that's a reputable news agency. It is, but does this look like ABC News? Right? And that's what they do. And so these little Me Too sites pop up when there's a big news story. And they get web addresses that are very similar to the real web address. And they're so good, they can make it look like the real thing. And then you think, wow, that's amazing. But if it looks fishy at all, run. Right? Like, wait a minute. abcnews.com.ds? ES? What is that? Why are there two?
Yes.
You know? So that's the easy one. Check the website. All right. Number two. If the picture is really bad, that's often not good, right? Like, wait a minute. Or if they use a lot of capital letters, right? Like Donald Trump, and then a lot of exclamation points or unnecessary punctuation, bells should be going off. Wait a minute. Nobody writes like that. And why is that picture so blurry? All right. The telemarketer rule. If the news comes to you, it's often not good, right? If you seek out information, that's very different from somebody calling you. Hey, do you want to buy these crazy towels or whatever? Right? So if news is sort of like butting itself in Facebook, right? Butting in. You have to immediately think, wait a minute, why is this news butting in? And what's the purpose behind it? Now, that's not to say that all news butting in is not bad. I follow the Washington Post and New York Times and stuff, and like they butt in with headlines and things, and I would assume those are fairly reputable, right, organizations. So, but just be careful for the telemarketer. All right, now here, advanced. This is system 2. This is the stuff that requires conscious thought, that requires effortful thinking. All right, you got to be Sherlock Holmes in this stuff. You can select a reverse Google image search. All right, now, most official news organizations show who took that picture. And if they don't, you can right-click on with your mouse and click search Google for image and find out where that picture came from. So like for instance, if it looks weird and you're like, wait, and you click and you find out that the photograph they're showing is from a rally 22 years ago, right? You might not know that. They may not point that out. But you look and go, there's a lot of people at that. Why are there so many people there? And you click, you can find out. You just search Google for the image, and it'll tell you where that picture was taken, who took it, and how long it's been on the internet. Most reputable news organizations pay photographers to go and take pictures. Or they pay the AP to use their pictures. So if it's a recent news article, it should have a recent picture, right? Unless they're comparing things, right? Advanced number 2. Down at the bottom of web pages are all these things that we generally never look at. But one of them is always should be an about. And this will spell out exactly how their news gets made. Like how many people they have reporting news. How much news is they themselves reporting, and how much of it are they getting from other news sources like the AP, right?
What's BBC?
The British broadcast.
British broadcast.
I don't know why I picked that one. Quote the quotes, okay? So you read through and you find like, Barack Obama did this and this is what he said. You can pick out that quote and put the whole quote in the Google search and find out, did he really say that? Because if it's a famous enough person, that quote will be quoted all over the place. If you put the quote in and no one seems to have any access to it, it's made up. Right? Quote the quotes. And then you can search for the author. Often fake news, just like the websites, they'll have authors that their names are very close to real reporters' names. Right? Like really close. You'll be like, wait a minute. I think I've heard that name before. But you can search for the reporter. Who is this person? Who do they work for? And if they have no paper trail, they're made up. And if the reporter's made up, the news is made up. Publication date. As we mentioned early on, sometimes these fake news organizations will find old news that's real and republish it to suit their needs now. Right? So let's look at some old news that fits this narrative now, and they won't mention, or they'll have little tiny print as to when that thing was originally published. There are fact checkers. These are the big ones, and basically what they do is they curate the internet. So they check multiple sources for multiple news outlets about multiple stories continuously on the hunt, right? Trying to root out what is fake news. And in fact, if you like do a Google search for something that could be considered fake news, right? Like here, was Barack Obama born in Kenya?
It says you have no internet connection.
Oh, that's from before, thank you. Yeah. All right. Okay. See at the top? We have the
Right.
and then Snopes, right? So it'll immediately send out fact check, right? So Google has a machine now, an algorithm, that does this automatically when you type in a headline and you wonder about it. And the first few sites that come up are going to have fact check. The problem is the news happens so fast that that virus that we talked about at the Tea Party can spread so fast that Google can't catch up, right? So it takes a little bit of time, and in a world where seconds really matter, you can't rely on that, right? But there are fact checkers out there trying to help. Let's see here. Okay. Facebook too is changing their rules about how things can get posted. They're lagging behind Google, but most technology companies lag behind Google, but they're getting there. And they have a part of their now algorithms in terms of what's shared and whether or not it's shared from an appropriate news organization. Facebook's in a difficult position because what happens if I really like this pundit and I really think that I want my friends to see that this is what I really like? Well, that should be what I post, right? This is my social networking. So they're in a difficult place where Google really, especially Google News, just aggregates news. Facebook is in a different place. They're trying to encourage people to share information, but they want to make sure you share information that's factual. Like hate speech and things you can't, I mean, they have that rooted out, but
I'm old enough to remember
So-
when people did talk about politics.
that's probably the biggest failure of all this, is that we don't really talk face to face about anything anymore. Yeah, you know, it's very difficult. It's, you know, there's another great book called Bowling Alone. That's first name, I think his last name is Putnam. And basically what he wrote about is the decline of the social club. Had like Masons and the Daughters of the American Revolution and stuff. They just don't meet anymore. We just go home and stay in our house and watch our big screen TV and swim in our own little pool and check. Right? We look at pictures of other people's vacations and think, oh, that's nice, right? Like we live these vicarious lives, but we never chat, you know. All right, so that's all I have. Has anyone I know I just bombarded you with like, I wanted to make sure I filled the hour, so I've got like 5 hours worth, but certainly if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. And that one book there, Thinking Fast and Slow, if you're interested about the psychology of it, I would recommend it highly. I will say it's a little, has anyone ever read it?
I did.
Yeah, it's a little bit wordy. There's a couple parts where you're like, okay, this guy, you know, went to MIT or whatever, it's pretty clear. But you can kind of wait, yeah, it's textbooky in some places, but the research is really quite amazing. And there's new stuff like that coming out all the time, although he's sort of...
He thinks slow and I think fast. That's why I read it.
Did it help?
The thing I think is I'm humanities and he's science. I mean, he went to Stanford and studied geology and all, and I'm history and music. That's me. So I think that's more of a problem.
Yeah.
We just come from
Different.
worlds.
I think a lot of these issues with fake news would be solved if we did talk. You know, if we could get out of our little houses with our big screen TVs and see each other, I think it would help.
You know, it's almost gotten to the point where it's frustrating to have to call someone and talk about something, because it's not fast enough.
I know.
My kids
Yeah,
don't want you to call.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
wants you to
Get all
email
these
them.
things sent, or
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
call
don't-
them,
yeah.
I'll just give them a quick text.
I'll send a text.
My birthday cards come on, Happy Mother's Day, thinking of you, you know. I'd like to hear your voice.
They could record it. Yeah, I do think a lot of it would be, you know, if we just slowed down, maybe, you know, I don't know.
Well, we kind of have, but we're probably the only people in the whole world.
I've tried to, yeah. You have to be deliberate, like it takes deliberate practice to really not fall for it, you know, and that, you know, we're just talking about fake news, but like look at like just the commercialization of everything, the idea of the throwaway culture and how much stuff we feel like we have to have. When my daughter was 2 years old, we got rid of cable at my house because we were grocery shopping and she was asking for a specific fabric softener, and I was like, okay, a 2-year-old should not know. But it had a cute bear on it. And I was like, we gotta, like, okay, if she's getting that, and she wasn't even watching TV. You know, she was just playing and the TV was on and, you know, there's this cute bear, and then suddenly she's like, I want that one, Daddy. Like, wait, what? It's fabric softener. You shouldn't be concerned with fabric softener. But.
And there's so many,
So-
there's so many, of what, you know, they're like 15 seconds and there'll be 5 of them. Instead of a
that
nice
hyper
long
reality.
jingle. Yeah, it's too
Yeah.
much. I turn them down.
Oh, yeah.
And the beginning of shows where everybody claps and yells and stands up and hoops and back like that, I mean, why do you why?
Yeah,
It's all over, it's just all over, too much.
too much, too often, yeah, it is a problem. But the good news is, as we talked about, the human brain has the high road, right, and the low road. So if you try to shut the low road up a little, and you start becoming more mindful about what you're doing, and use that, you know, the frontal part of our brain and not the reptilian let's eat part, no, I don't know. I think of the level of my mental exhaustion when I get home and like after working all day, you know, I mean, teachers get asked a lot of questions, and so I answer a lot of questions, and there are times where I can't answer any more questions. It's like I've like had enough questions, you know. So I don't know how we get around that. What I do is I run or exercise, ride my bike, and then I kind of can get back together.
And I play solitaire on the computer.
That's what my mother does. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I used to
She
knit.
turns it off.
I used to knit,
Yeah.
and playing solitaire or playing Candy Crush, I'm allergic to Candy Crush, I must say, but I don't have to think about it. You know, I just do it, and it calms me right down.
Yeah. You'd like my mom. That's what she does. All right. She's a goddess in Candy Crush. Mark, this one?
Yes, that's the one.
She belonged to Facebook, see, I don't.
She
so
just got Facebook seriously like 2 weeks ago.
Because it gives you more.
And every now and then she'll post some random